Hi, and thanks for listening. Before we begin, we just wanted to reassure you that if you have worked with any of our hosts or guests, that we treat your privacy with the utmost of respect. Therefore, you won't hear us divulging any confidential or identifiable details about you or your loved one in any of our episodes. Unless, of course, you would like to be featured as a guest yourself and talk about your experiences. In which case, please do get in touch with us via the contact details at the end of the show. That said, let's get on with the next episode. Hey guys, welcome back to episode 4 of Over My Dead Poddy, the podcast where we aim to bust the myths and answer your questions about death and funeral planning. Thank you so much for tuning back in to episode 4. We are loving everything that you are sending us via socials, so keep that coming. Of course, I am joined this week, as I am every week, by my brilliant co-host, Carl. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks. Yeah, nice to be here again.
And we've also got the excellent producer, Steve, with us too.
Still hiding
behind the mic. So this week, we are tackling a really, really important topic, but one that is quite difficult for Carl and myself to talk about, and that's direct cremations. Now, direct cremations have grown exponentially since COVID-19 pandemic, where numbers were restricted at funerals. We saw more direct cremations happening, and that's a trend that's continued to the point where probably now we're around about 25-30% of all funerals are direct cremations. It's such a huge topic, and it is not mine nor Carl's job to judge whether they're right or wrong for your family, or say whether they are a good thing or a bad thing. We have our opinions, but we're not going to share them here. Our job on this episode of the podcast is to help try and clarify and explain some of the facts, but also give you some food for thought, some considerations, and some questions to ask if you think direct cremations might be the right thing for you or your loved one in the future. So the million-dollar question to start with, Carl, I'm going to come to you. What is the difference between a funeral and a direct cremation?
A direct cremation is as simple as it sounds. It is a legal disposal of a body, and it's as simple as that. Now, there are a lot of companies up and down the country who offer direct cremations, and also local funeral homes that offer the same service, which I'll come on to in a moment. Whereas a funeral service is where we would obviously attend and we would have a celebration of that person's life. But a direct cremation is it's what we call an unattended service, where there is nobody attending other than the funeral director taking your loved one to the crematorium.
So in my arty, flowery world of celebrancy, I often think of funerals in the same way that I think of weddings and baby namings. So if you think of a wedding, there is a marriage, which is the legal element, and a wedding, which is the ritual, where we come together, where we celebrate, where we get emotional support from one another, and we create memories. When it comes to a baby, we register a baby's birth, and then we have the ritual of a naming ceremony or a christening to welcome them into a faith or to celebrate their arrival. Likewise, when somebody passes away, there are legal things that we have to do. We have to register their death and legally dispose of a body. But outside of that, the funeral is the ritual. It's the time where we come together for emotional support, to make memories and to celebrate a life. So I kind of think of the two as quite similar to weddings, baby names, those two different elements to funeral and to cremation. So Carl, probably a lot of the questions in this episode are going to come to you because you deal with this every day, day in, day out. Maybe what a lot of our listeners will be really used to, really familiar with, is seeing all of those adverts on the TV offering a direct cremation. And just like there's flexibility in a funeral service, there's real flexibility in direct cremations too. They aren't something that are particularly new. Funeral directors have offered them for years. So, for example, where you've worked, in your experience, have people always been able to have a direct cremation via a funeral director?
Yes, they have. So there has always been that option there, but it's never really been that publicised. Of course, any funeral director who's worth their salt would always offer that service, but it's never really taken off. And I think since COVID, it's now become almost the norm to offer and to people to think about it. But what I would say is that, as with all of this, and the reason for doing this podcast, is that there are choices throughout absolutely everything, including your direct cremations. So, as you've alluded to, there are lots of companies who advertise on the television, who offer these services at certain prices. And you would also get funeral directors doing exactly the same in your local area, wherever you're from. And that's something to be mindful of as well, is that it doesn't just have to be bought off the telly, spoken over the phone. It can be done in your local funeral home with somebody who, you potentially know.
And this is a really important thing about this episode. This is a difficult topic for us to address, but we just want to try and clarify the differences and make sure that you feel informed for any decisions that you're making. So potentially, when somebody sees an advert on the television offering a direct cremation, they often use the word funeral, but there is no funeral as part of that. It literally is that company will come and recover the deceased, take them to a crematorium that could be anywhere in the country. The cremation will happen, and ashes are very often delivered back either by post or somebody knocks on your door with those. And that is pretty much all you get, as I understand it, from a lot of those television advertised direct cremations. Is that right? You've pretty much hit the nail on the head there, Nicola. And a lot of things that people don't understand is that with these companies, you really don't have the opportunity to see your loved one again from the point of them passing till the point of cremation, where potentially local funeral directors can offer that service. So yes, we can offer the direct cremation. And of course, yes, it isn't as expensive as a huge, all singing, all dancing funeral with your hearse, the limousine, and all of the bells and whistles that go with them potentially for funerals. But we can still offer that small, dignified service where you get the opportunity to still say your goodbyes and still have that small celebration if you desire. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that people aren't necessarily aware of when they're making a choice. So I was with a brilliant funeral director earlier today. We were chatting about this exact topic, and he said when he starts to talk to families about what they'd like, they just didn't realise that a direct cremation with any funeral director means that they can see their loved one, that they're transported to the crematorium in a regular hearse, that music is played, that they're carried in by their pallbearers. It's all very respectful and dignified. It's not the back of a van and dropped at the back door of the crematorium. And it's just, there's no right or wrong. It's about understanding the difference and the implications of your decisions. It is, yeah, you're right. And lots of funeral directors offer different services, as you alluded to, the hearse is used and so on, pallbearers, of course. And then in other funeral homes, they're not. But of course, that's the questions that we'd like you to ask your funeral directors again. And that's why we're here, the whole point of it. The other side for me is also looking at the human emotion side of things. So again, being in North Yorkshire, as we said in previous podcasts, when we turn up to family homes and they say, "Oh, Dad just said chuck us in the swale or chuck us in the bin." Yes, fine, yeah, okay. Well, and they said, "Well, we know about this direct cremation. It's it's the next best thing." Yes, potentially it may be for the person who's passed away, but we also need to be mindful of the people who are still here. It's such a good point. And I think increasingly as we're seeing direct cremations become a bigger and bigger trend, we're then having families a few months down the line who have respected their loved one's wishes. They've gone ahead with that direct cremation. They've never been and visited their loved one after they've passed away. They didn't always know what day the cremation was happening. A few months down the line, that grief journey is getting even more traumatic, or it's getting delayed, or they're bottling up emotions because they've not had that chance to come together, to grieve collectively, to take support from other people, to remember the really good times. And all of those things are really important. We don't underestimate our responsibility in ensuring we've given people the most positive experience we can to take the next steps in grieving their loved one. I think it's a very good point that you make as well, that yes, all of that is correct. But there's also, you need to think about, yes, they may have requested a direct cremation and no service. That doesn't stop you from having a bloody good party after and bringing that celebration of the person's life together. And that's another thing that, potentially you can look at. So
like you say, as a service after, so a service of Thanksgiving, or even, having somebody like yourself as an independent celebrant turn up to a family home and just have a little bit of a gathering or a bit of a get together to celebrate that person's life. It can be done at a family home, it can be done in a local pub, wherever you fancy it. It doesn't matter, and that then helps sort of round off the service as such.
And it is absolutely all about flexibility and tailoring the support that you need as a family, which is what we've talked about throughout this podcast. So I've had situations where it's maybe not been exactly a direct cremation, but we've had 4 or 5 family members, a very small service, played a couple of music tracks. I've literally given a committal, nothing more. That's what's happened at the crematorium in the morning. In the afternoon, we have a great big party. Just as you say, we can do a bit of a eulogy. We can have family speakers. We have photographs. We have music. So there is a balance to be found. So there was a phrase that I heard earlier this week that I thought was really beautiful, which said, a funeral is a bridge between honouring the dead and helping to heal the living. And whatever that means for you and your family will be different, but I think it's a really important consideration to think about how do we honour our loved one and their wishes, but also help ourselves move forward. So when it comes to thinking about possibly having a direct cremation, Carl, what do you think are some of the motivations to those people who are considering it as an option?
So for me, direct cremations inevitably are price-driven, cost-driven, but that doesn't necessarily outweigh the cost of what's left for families with the emotional support side of things, because it's often the person who is either dying or is putting this request together to say, I want the direct cremation, because it saves the hassle of anyone organising a funeral, organising anything from start to finish. I don't want them to do that. We'll just have this. It's easy. But sometimes easy isn't always the best option or the best answer. And again, it's always worth opening up this conversation, as we keep saying, and over again, is talking to your family members and saying, okay, that's maybe what you want, but how is it going to affect us in the long run?
So very often when somebody is planning their funeral and they select a direct cremation, it can often be around, I don't want to put my family through that, having to think about music and if anybody wants to speak and how they're going to get to the crematorium and all of those things that go into it. I don't want them having all that stress and bother at a time when they're grieving. But actually, some families tell me it's a real honour to have done my best for them. That's the last thing that I can do in their name. And it really has been an honour to plan all this and to make sure that we got it perfect. So I think that's something to consider as well. It does feel like a privilege sometimes for families.
It is, and as a funeral director setting up funerals, that's my privilege, that's my honour to set that up. But also you find it that families will say, well, it's geographically, so I've got family living across the country. They won't turn up, I don't want to stress, they've got busy lives. But in actual fact, 9 times out of 10, it's the opposite way. And families come and they make that effort, and that's their life worth celebrating.
And there's so many ways we can get around that, whether that's in a church or a crematorium these days, with videos, live streaming, highlights, all those kind of things. So no longer does it feel like, nobody will come, so we shouldn't do this. There are ways of bringing us all together, even if that means virtually.
So also with direct cremations, what families also need to be made aware of is that you don't get much choice in coffins as well, and what your families are going to be going in, as in what you're going to be dressed in. So a lot of people really don't like the idea of being put into a funeral director's gown or a robe, but would really like to be dressed in their own clothes. And in some services that are offered, that just isn't a case, and you don't get to pick the coffins or anything at all. And I think that's something also to be mindful of when you are thinking of looking into the direct cremation option.
And for some families, that'll be a huge relief, because the one thing they just can't cope with at a time when they're grieving is lots and lots of decisions. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a consideration that if you do choose a direct cremation, and particularly one of the larger national organisations that advertise via the television probably, then you will have significantly fewer choices than with a full funeral or with a direct cremation booked through a funeral director. So it is all about the level of choice that you want and involvement in that service. It's not about one option being better or good or bad versus the other. But Carl, I'm just going to make another point, slightly away from direct cremations. But if somebody was thinking, I don't want a direct cremation as such, but I want it to be small, intimate, no fuss, because that's what dad or granddad would want. There are ways that funeral directors can help you put a service together that isn't necessarily as big and extravagant as some of the ones you might see and is right for you.
Yeah, 100%. And that's, again, funeral directors' responsibility, and their role is to guide you through that and offer everything that's available and put that service together that's tailor-made to you and your loved one, certainly.
And actually, when you have an officiant at your service delivering a eulogy, or if a vicar was there giving prayers, that's brilliant. But you don't need that. You don't have to have anybody at your service. So if you literally want to go in, listen to 6 or 7 music tracks, have somebody close the curtains, the chapel attendant or your funeral director can press all of the right buttons to make that happen. You don't need to have somebody there to do it, or it could just be a friend or a family member saying a few words. So it can be just as simple as you want, but actually have that moment to recognise and say thank you to your loved one and say farewell without having all the big theatre or the ritual of a funeral. So, Carl, I hope throughout this episode we've tried to be as unbiased as we can and be really clear about we are not trying to guide you down any path. You absolutely should do what is right for you and your loved one. But if you were considering a direct cremation, were considering contacting one of the organisations you see on TV or one of your local funeral directors, what are the sorts of questions you should be asking them to make sure you're fully informed before you make a decision?
For me, just asking what's it all about and just see where they lead you in that. You know, local funeral directors would certainly guide you through things such as, firstly, where the cremation is going to take place. And that's a big part for me. So when we are talking to families who are saying, oh, we're thinking of going down the direct cremation route, we've spoken to an online company, we've spoken to the people on the telly or on the radio. And one of my mum's or dad's wishes at this point is that they have to be cremated in this area or local crematoriums. And that's, again, is to be mindful that some of these companies own their own crematoriums. So you are collected and taken to their crematorium, which potentially could be anywhere in the country and not local, and then your ashes then returned to you.
So I think what we're saying is just be really clear you know what you're getting. That's the thing that I think for a lot of families has shocked them, that they thought they were buying one thing and they got something completely different. So the amount of money you will spend on a direct cremation is still significant. It's not small change. So be really, really sure about what it is that I'm getting. What information will I have from you? Will I know about the date the cremation is going to happen? Will I know where it's going to happen? Can I send my loved ones clothes for them to be cremated in? Can I put letters or photographs into the coffin with them? Can they play their favourite song as the cremation is happening? Some of those things matter to families. For some families, it doesn't. But just be really, really clear you know what you're buying into before you go ahead and commit to those decisions. So I'm just going to come back to a point that we touched on earlier, which is for those families where their loved one has chosen a direct cremation and therefore their family hasn't had any sort of funeral service. Once they've received the ashes back, they might be thinking about, well, let's do an ashes interment or a scattering kind of service or a memorial or something like that to celebrate the person's life and to perhaps give us that staging point that we can move on from. If they wanted to organise something like that, would they do that via a funeral director?
Yes, so the possibilities for this are genuinely endless. And I would always recommend contacting your local funeral director just for the advice or just for some inspiration of what they've done before, as of course they're the professionals and have done it quite possibly hundreds of times before. So you can do anything you wish with ashes nowadays. So from simply having some jewellery made, as I've said before, having them sent into space, tattoos, the works. But also there is that opportunity to have those little special services. So again, whether we look into going into church or whether we get an independent celebrant like yourself, Nicola, to come and, have that small service, which again, that can be done. And I say that to say small service, it can be done on any scale. You can invite whoever you wish.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are thinking about wanting any kind of memorial service. If you look on some of the association websites, like the Association of Independent Celebrants or the Fellowship of Professional Celebrants, there's a whole directory on there of national coverage. Find a celebrant that you like the look of, who you think fits your style. Just give them a ring, have a chat about memorial. I probably get a couple of phone calls a month just asking what's possible, what could we do, where could we have it, can we do it at midnight on the beach? That's my favourite venue. If anybody wants to know, then that's my particular favourite. But yeah, just give one of us a call, have a chat with us, see what we could put together for you. And we'll be really happy to guide you through that whole process. So I think that's pretty much a wrap on direct cremation. I think it's as much as we can probably tell you comfortably without us veering into areas where we don't have the expertise or where it could be seen that we're trying to lead you one way or the other, which we're absolutely not. So this episode was just about trying to explain some of the things that people get confused about and just ensure that you know what you're asking for. So the big outtake from this episode is just ask the questions. And if you're not sure where to begin, just pick up the phone to your local independent funeral director, whoever that is, and just have a chat with them about what does direct cremation mean? What do I get? How much was it likely to cost me? What else could I do? And just start a conversation. If you don't start it with them, at least start it with each other so that your loved ones aren't shocked when they find out that that's your option and actually they feel like they wanted a little bit more. So just keep the conversations going, funeral directors with each other, and make the decision that's right for you. So I'm now going to move on to our question of the week. And this potentially might end up in a whole episode if you guys feel like it's something that's interesting enough for us to explore a little bit further. But it is something that we've had a few questions on already. And that's, how do you get into the funeral industry? Oh my God, what a can of worms. So Carl, I'm going to start possibly at the kind of entry level into the funeral industry. So to be a funeral service operative, how would you get into that? How do new people join your team in that position at your business?
I must admit, it is getting harder and harder nowadays just to get into the funeral industry. But once you're in, it opens up so many different opportunities for you. Back in the day, you would just turn up to a funeral director as you were, smartly dressed, drop in your CV and say, here I am. If there was a job going, then there's a good chance that you would probably be given a choice. Nowadays, with all of the rules and regulations that go hand in hand with the funeral industry or that are coming into play, it is a little bit more difficult. What I would always recommend, certainly with the independent funeral directors, is if you are interested or you have a bit of an urge to want to know more, is simply just to turn up and do the old-fashioned thing and meet the funeral directors and just be yourself.
And I'm going right back to episode 1, I think it was, when we were talking about the different roles within the industry. Just as a reminder, a funeral service operative might be involved in driving the hearse or the limo, looking after the deceased while they're in the funeral home, carrying the deceased into chapel, attending somebody's home initially to recover the deceased, those kind of tasks. Is there anything else that I've missed out that they'd be involved in?
That's pretty much it. Of course, they are one of the most valuable parts of the business. They are the heartbeat of it, of course. But then you also have other cogs of the wheel. So you've got people like the embalmers, the makeup artists, the hairdressers, again, someone like myself, funeral directors. And that also...
Well, I'm just going to interrupt you there for a second because I had a flashback for a moment to that first episode where I did think those funeral service operatives are really the backbone of the industry. They keep so much going. We really do need to give them the biggest shout out. You won't really see them so much because they seamlessly come in and out of a service, do a brilliant job, and you don't notice them, but they keep us all going. So thank you to you guys. You do a brilliant job and keep doing it. But the bit that amazed me in the comment you've just made is hairstylist and makeup artist, and that's not just for the funeral directors.
Definitely not, yeah. So funeral directors as such, so someone like myself would always speak to families and say, okay, well, you're wanting to come in and see mum, have we got a recent photo? And the reason we ask that is because I don't know what mum looked like, or I don't know which side dad had his parting on, and things like that, which often mean the most to families. And there are specialist people within the industry who can do all of that. So hairstylists who literally can perm mum's hair, we can cut people's hair and so on. And again, same with the makeup artists. They are incredible people who know people's skin tones and how they react in certain situations, in certain environments. But of course, you don't need these professionals. You can come in and do it yourself if you really wanted to.
Wow, and I guess that's something nobody would have ever considered. But if you're a hairdresser or a makeup artist and you're thinking, I really feel like I've got something to offer the industry, same as with a funeral service operative, just go knock on the doors of funeral directors, show them what you can do, offer your services, and find your way in just through chatting to people.
100%, yeah, I would always recommend that. And same online, the bigger national companies, they're always on the lookout for people, and you just never know.
And we might bust another myth here, but embalming you also talked about. Are our deceased in the UK always embalmed? Is that something that has to happen?
So the embalming procedure doesn't happen to every family member. It's a choice that's given, and a funeral director should always advise you on what it is and what it all entails, so you can make an informed decision going forward.
And I'm going to tackle one of those awkward subjects again, because we said we would. And while hairstylists and makeup artists can make a deceased look absolutely beautiful, there may be times when a funeral director says to a family, we would recommend that you don't view your loved one any longer because changes have started to happen. And that's really good advice to take, however hard it sounds.
It's a really, really difficult conversation. And as funeral directors, we have a duty of care to the family and also a duty of care to the person who sadly passed. And if you think of your loved ones, they would always say, well, I want you to come in and see me looking my best. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. And unfortunately, when anybody passes away, that natural process of death does take over. And there are times where we have to, unfortunately, say, it's probably best that you don't come in. However, you still can come in, but potentially maybe with the coffin closed.
And I think that's a really important point where we've said right throughout this series, all of the choices are yours, you're in control, but that is a time when really listen to the advice your funeral director is giving you, and they're giving it you for a reason to try and save you from any further hurt or distress. So with that said, we veered away from the topic a little bit, but how does someone become a funeral director?
So to become a funeral director, for me, isn't an easy thing just to walk into. I would always recommend going to being a funeral director with an open mind and starting off at the beginning. So as a funeral service operative, and just get to know exactly how the business works and what it all entails. And then it's then learning and going into seeing a family. But if you really do have that burning desire to become one, then I would certainly, again, just recommend going into funeral homes and showing them who you are and what you're about. A lot of it is about people skills as well, and being able to read the room and handle people's emotion and ultimately make sure that family are looked after from start to finish.
And I think that's such a great point. In terms of life skills and people skills are the most important thing. Pretty much everything else, whether it's a celebrant or a funeral director, crematorium assistant, the technicalities we can teach people, but it's about those inherent calm under pressure, reading the room, emotional intelligence. Those are the skills you'll need by the bucket load.
There is a story that I always revert back to about a funeral director who was a really, really good guy, and he just had this ability to make people feel at ease. There was one particular day we were outside a family home, and it was glorious sunshine. And as the family walked out, he just said, "What a beautiful day." Well, not for you, obviously. And just the place erupted because they realised that he meant it with the best intentions. But yes, it wasn't the best day for them, but the sun was shining.
And those moments happen all the time at funerals. There is humour still in death. Now, Carl and I are getting the death stare from producer Steve here for the length of our answers. And he's going, we don't have a 3-hour show. So we are going to have to curtail it there. But I think we might come back to this topic about how do you get into the funeral industry if it's something you'd like to do. But the short answer would be do a bit of research, find out the role that you're most interested in, and then just pick up the phone to your local funeral director, your local celebrant, and have a chat with us about how we got started and how we might be able to help you. So, Carl, we are going to wrap up the show very briefly with your fondest funeral moment of this week.
So for this week, my fondest funeral moment isn't just one, it's a multiple of these, and it's just simply the thank you letters that we get back from families. And that really is, and does mean the most to me, is that knowing that I've looked after a family, and I don't have them to hand, I can't quote them, but I do have them. And I must admit, I keep every card that I get. I've got stacks of them at home, and that's not me showing off or being brass or anything, but it's genuinely is such a feel-good factor that when somebody takes that time just to, it doesn't have to be a card or anything, just an email, just to say thank you. It means the world.
And I would echo that thought entirely. And whilst we never do it for the thank you gifts or the cards or anything else that might come our way, it is so, so beautiful to get those words of appreciation and thanks, because you say to us, thanks for all your help and support and your kindness. But you, as the families, you're the guys that are really inspiring, that we continue to be amazed by. So the fact that amongst all that grief, you found the time to say thank you to us is just absolutely awesome. So thank you so much. But my fondest funeral moment for this week comes from that time in a ceremony that absolutely every celebrant dreads. When somebody stands up and says, just hang on a minute, will you? And you think, oh, bugger, I've got a name wrong, or I've got a detail wrong. Somebody's not happy with something and you're desperately checking all of your facts. What is it that's going on? But on this one occasion, this guy just gets his rucksack. He pulls out 3 bottles of red wine and some plastic glasses. He unscrews the lid and he passes the glasses around, pours out the red wine and starts drinking it. And it was quite early on in my celebrant career. And I just thought, what do I do now? Do I stop this? Do I join in? Do I say something? I just thought, well, if you can't beat it, join it. And I grabbed a glass of red wine. I toasted the deceased. And I made sure that everybody there really felt like that service reflected the life that we were celebrating. And after all, my business is called Rebel Heart Ceremonies. So what else was a girl to do in that situation? So those are our fondest memories of the week. So that's a wrap on episode 4. As we say, thank you so much for listening to us. We really, really appreciate you sticking with us. The show is evolving. We're trying our best to get better. As we say, we are not professional podcasters. We are just 3 people around a kitchen table with a can of beer trying to help you guys with some really, really tough conversations. Please do pop over to wherever you get your podcasts from. Leave us a review, subscribe, and follow us so that you don't miss out on our next episode. And our next episode is one that Carl and I are so excited about. We're going to have 2 guests on the show, 2 families that we've worked with, talking about their experiences, what they learned, and some of the good that has come out of grief. Really, really emotive and inspiring conversations. So we can't wait for you to join us on the next episode of Over My Dead Poddy. See you then. Thank you for listening. And we really hope you enjoyed and were inspired by this week's episode. Remember that you can get in touch with us anytime to ask a question, offer to be a guest, or to request that we bust a particular myth. You can get in touch via any of our social accounts over My Dead Poddy on Facebook, Insta, or TikTok. Or you can drop us an email at overmydeadpoddy@gmail.com. Just a reminder that whilst all of us work in the funeral industry, none of us are fully qualified grief counsellors. And therefore, if you've been affected by any of the issues that we've discussed today, we highly recommend that you seek out professional or medical support to help you with those conversations. Should you need any support, please do get in touch and we can hopefully signpost you in the right direction, but we can't offer those services ourselves. Thanks for listening, and we can't wait to bring you the next episode.